place. A long time ago, I thought that it would be good and a patriotic thing to do. I still think it is a patriotic thing to do to take a position, either a volunteer position or to run for office, is a very patriotic thing to do. So I ran for office. I can't imagine any of you would remember that. And I did get elected. And it was something. And I sat there, and during some of those meetings, your mind had an opportunity to wander. Can you not hear it because it's not loud enough, Herb? Because I can hear every word you said.
What was that again?
Yeah. Am I not talking into the microphone? Is this better?
Yeah.
More better it is. I could go for more better. So I looked around, and I saw that there were 9 of us on the town council. And the budget for the year was about $120 million that those 9 people were voting on. Just 9 people. So I said, well, what's $120 million divided by 9? And it's like $14 million a person. And I said, that's kind of a lot of money. And then I thought, well, gee, $14 million a person. I won by 2,000 votes. So what is the amount of say that you have for one vote? So I divided, well, you're in for 2 years. So I divided $14 million divided by 2,000 is about $7 million, or about $7,000 for 2 years. So I got that every vote that is cast, every vote that's cast influences $14,000 worth of decisions. And that's just the financial thing. That's not the voting for laws or restricting things or whatever else. It's just the finances. And it made me realize yet again, people don't get it when there's an opportunity to vote. They don't get it. Voting is crazy important. It's one of the most effective ways that you could have a voice out of any single thing that you can do. One of the most effective things is to vote for almost anything. Can you imagine? Every vote is worth $14,000. When do you have an opportunity to affect $14,000 in an afternoon? I don't think. Now, maybe it's a Meshuggah way to look at things, but I looked at it that way. There's an election going on right now, a different kind of election. And it's an election it's a Jewish election. Can you imagine such a thing, a Jewish election? There is. You know, ever since the stuff I read about in the 10 Commandments, and that time that we were freed from Egypt, which is, yes, the greatest story ever told, where a ragtag bunch of slaves speaks truth to the most powerful leader of the most powerful nation of the world, and God is on the side of freedom. And we come, and it's amazing, Jews are right at the center of this. We're the very first ones to speak up on behalf of the downtrodden, the first ones to get the concept of the Sabbath, a day of rest, the first to bring into the world that God wants us to know how to read, and in every family there should be someone to know how to read. That's a very liberating concept. And to read the 10 Commandments of all the things. And that God was going to bring us to a land, and it's important to have a land. And do you know that ever since the 3,500 years back, we have maintained literacy is really important. We have maintained the Sabbath. We're told Ahad Ha'am says more than Israel has kept the Sabbath has kept Israel. We kept our language, even though we were in all different places. The language that the original 10 Commandments was in, we kept that. And we kept our connection to the land of Israel, even when we didn't have our own country there, over the thousands of years. I mean, no other people has been so displaced from their land, yet has such a strong tie and connection to it as we do. About 100 years back, there was a guy named Theodor Herzl. He was motivated because he saw a real prominent and well-decorated French general, a guy named Dreyfus, be excoriated publicly, humiliated publicly, on real trumped-up charges. They were totally trumped up. They were totally false charges, and he was stripped of his position and sent to prison. And the newspaper said, and the crowds chanted, not Dreyfus goes to jail, but they said the Jew goes to jail. The Jew goes to jail. And he realized, because he was raised Jewish, he realized that Jews will never be safe unless we have our own land. And a little over 100 years ago, he founded a group called the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress, Jews all over the world, who said, we have a connection to Israel, and we want all Jews all over the world to have a connection and a say in the homeland, in our homeland, Israel. And that was a dramatic move. I mean, I remember when I was a little kid, I remember when I went to Sunday school and we learned about the prophets, Isaiah and Micah and Ezekiel and Herzl. One of my teachers told me that Herzl was every bit a prophet, just like the other ones. Which is interesting, because he predicted, he said, if you will it, it won't be a dream. And it ended up not being a dream. And from the little pushkas, we bought land anytime it was free for Jewish people to go and settle there and work there. Thank you. I get in trouble if I say words like that. I'm glad you did. But anyways, we worked it so much that we didn't have it anymore. We took ownership of the land, and that connection of the World Zionist Congress, they met every 5 years to determine a few different things. And there were 3 big organizations that were founded through the World Zionist Congress. Early on, over 100 years ago, before there was a state. There was Karen Kayemet LeYisrael, which is like JNF, it's the sister organization, that would buy the land and own the land for all Jews. And we know it as the one that we plant trees, and you can see, if you go out our door, you look to the right, you see all the trees in Israel we planted. But did you know in Israel, if you want to buy a plot of land, you don't buy it. You can't buy land. You only rent it. You lease it. You lease it for 99 years. All of the land of Israel is owned by the land that's not Palestinian land. The land of Israel is owned by Jewish people, the Jewish people all over the world. And they collect a little bit of interest, of rent, for renting the land. Which, ironically, is kind of like what it was in biblical times, where the land reverted back to the family. It was all owned by God, and God reverted back to the family every 50th year. There's another group called the Jewish Agency, and the Jewish Agency helps out Jews that are in trouble wherever they are, anywhere in the world. And there's another one called the World Zionist Organization and World Jewish Appeal. They also reach out in many ways to help Jews all over the world come to Israel, help them in their different communities. Well, the World Zionist Congress continues to meet once every 5 years. And it's going to meet in just a few months. And they're going to determine who heads up these different organizations. And these different organizations, collectively, they're responsible for distributing $1 billion a year over 5 years. So it's $5 billion. It's a lot of money. In addition, they have a lot of say over what happens. There's 500 people. Almost half of them, half of the 500 relegated in the Congress, are for American or North American Jews. It includes Mexico and Canada and the United States. It's kind of our hemisphere. And there's an election right now. You can vote for those. Who's going to fill those seats? 5 years ago, the reform movement did pretty well. We got about a quarter of the votes. What that meant is we had funding for things like the Israel Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism that has a voice and a team that says women have equal rights to men. That Reform rabbis are really rabbis. That Reform synagogues need to be supported just like Orthodox ones. And now there's like 58 Reform synagogues in the land of Israel. It's interesting, right? You don't pay dues to Orthodox synagogues in Israel. It's funded by the state. And now some of that funding is going to the Reform congregations as well. Because we have a vote in the World Zionist Congress every 5 years. Now, I did the math on it, and I said, well, gee, $1 billion every 5 years, that's like $5 billion given out, just the math. And I said, well, the Reform movement got 21,000 votes in North America, and they got about a quarter of it. It comes down to every vote on that same, how much say do you have with each vote? Each vote is about $25,000 worth of say. Every vote. That's a lot. I wrote a newsletter article about it. I said, please let me know. I don't care who you vote for. There's 15 different slates. The conservative movement has one. There are a few other liberal slates. Some are more traditional. Some are ultra-Orthodox. There are some wonderful, wonderful slates. The Reform movement in particular, because we have that as really Religious Action Center. Plus, I happen to identify with Reform Jews. It's the one I voted for. I really, really want you to vote. You can vote for the Israeli Religious Action Center, but you don't have, it's called Vote Reform, it's called an ARTSA. Anyways, I tried hard to encourage people to vote. The newsletter came out 2 weeks ago. I said, please show me there's a symbol that says I voted. If you go online and you vote and you do it, show me your symbol. And you know how many people show me their symbol? No, it wasn't 3. It's in the February newsletter that's been out for a couple of weeks. Well, guess what I'm going to do? Look what I got here. Can you imagine, David? Come on up here. Well, you have to you have to say that you're Jewish. I got pink ones and white ones. You can take your pick. Okay? Yeah, they're identical. You have to someone else to help you make them out. Okay. All right. So I'll tell you who can vote. You have to, by voting, or you have to check off to say that these 4 things. Number 1, that you are Jewish. There's no checking. It's just if you say you're Jewish, you can vote. Number two, that you support what's called the Jerusalem Program. If you believe that all Jews all over the world have a say in what happens in Israel, that you believe that. The Jerusalem Program is written out. It's about 4 paragraphs long, the full statement. If you agree with it, then you get a vote. You have to be over 18 years of age, and you have to promise that you're not voting for the Knesset in Israel, because that's a different way to have your voice heard. So you go to the website there. I think it's called Zionist elections.org. Zionistelection.org. You have to pay. Thanks. You got to pay it's $7.50. That covers the fee for running an election. You got to pay for it. But I can tell you, you make a huge difference in Israel. Pass this around. If you could get 10 people to vote, if we all could, think about it. Our little congregation, if 21,000 votes gets you a quarter of a say, if it's $25,000 a vote, if you get 10 people to vote, you've affected $250,000 of Jewish funds. Isn't that staggering? Can you think of an easier way to affect so much? Isn't that crazy? And people just don't do it. Let me know. Send me let me know you vote. I'd be very happy to see it. Yes. She's talking about one of her cousins who's an activist in Israel, a rabbi, and she was arrested at the Western Wall for wearing a talit, and it was the Israeli Religious Action Center is very supportive of your cousin and her actions, and if you vote, you will help to make a big change. With that, I want to let you know that we can really have our voices heard and how to go about doing that. With that, I want to let you know about a couple of things that are coming up. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And a special thank you to the Wadowskis for tonight's oneg. Was there anyone else that helped out with it? And the Levins as well. Thank you to y'all. Mindy, you wanted to tell them about? No, did you want to tell them about the Hebrew? Yeah. With that, we're going to take a moment to remember a few people in particular. Nate, what's the name of your wife of blessed memory? Mildred Shore. We want to make sure that Mildred Shore's memory is here, that everyone thinks of Mildred Shore here, and that her memory should always be for a blessing. And we remember Lawrence Albert, the brother of Bev Finicum. We remember Sam Lipitz and Tilly D'Anto, Mamie Gittel Aronofsky, the grandmother of Herb Shook, Molly Zuckert, the mother of Pam Steinberg, Ray Rosen Robinson, Miriam Fewer, Sonia Cohen, Selma Byrne, Harry Lassman, Gertrude Katz, the mother of Jim Katz, Gary Richling, and Arthur Beck. Is there anyone else we ought to remember, either a recent death, a yahrzeit, or remembered for any other reason? Please. Norma, is that a recent death? Okay, we remember Norma and Norman Fritz. And the funerals happened? He should be remembered for blessing.
Helen Layden, Daniel Pearl, journal.
Yes.
Michael Chandler, Joanne Zola Porter, Pauline Moran.
Are they recent deaths? Do you want to share a couple of words about them?
There's an old superstition, deaths come in three. I don't necessarily believe it, but over a span of 12 days, my wife and I lost 3 friends. The last to pass away was a former neighbor of ours, a woman who was as beautiful on the inside as she was on the outside. When I learned of her diagnosis, I wanted to call her, but I was afraid to. Finally, summoned up the courage. I wasn't sure what to say to her, but when I spoke to her, she made me feel better. She wasn't Jewish, but she truly was a mensch. The person that passed prior to her was a friend of over 40 years. We didn't have any knowledge that she was ill, and only learned of her situation 3 days before she passed. Her husband preceded her by 7 years. She was a wonderful woman, 3 terrific children, 6 granddaughters. The first that passed was Michael Chandler, a name that I've been mentioning for 3 or 4 years now, who fought some good fights, and unfortunately, death took him. He and his wife, who still survives him, were like a brother and sister to Cameron and me. And he will be sorely missed. Thank you.
That their memories, oh, please. So may Sandy Brooks's memory also be for a blessing. We turn to page 598 and rise for Kaddish, 598.